Night in the Smokies doesn't fall. It settles. It comes down like a heavy wool blanket and smothers every sound that isn't meant to survive. In the hollers, even the wind learns to whisper. That's why the men on the logging road didn't hear the truck stop. They didn't hear the door open. They only noticed the silence change, like the mountain had taken one careful breath and decided to hold it. A flashlight clicked on, then another. Two hard cones of white cut through fog thick as cigarette smoke. The beams swung over wet gravel, over a patch of crushed fern, over a dragged line in the mud that looked too straight to be an animal. Then the light landed on something small, a single copper coil segment, bent and snapped clean, still smelling faintly of sour mash and burnt wood. Bootlegger's gold. And it was lying there like a warning. Because in the Smoky Mountains of 1989, when a still disappeared, it wasn't just a loss of liquor. It was a theft of identity, a stripped-out backbone, a threat that reached into kitchens and church pews and the places where men measured themselves. And when the Caldwell clan found that broken copper, when they realized their still was gone, their trail was fresh, and their enemies had already started running, they did something nobody outside the ridges would understand. They made a list, 13 names, 13 men, and they went hunting, not with sirens, not with a warrant, with boots, with dogs, with old grudges and new fear, with the kind of patience you grow when the mountain is your calendar and your judge. This is the Smoky Mountain Blood Hunt of 1989. The story of a stolen still, a clan that refused to swallow the insult, and 13 men who learned, too late, that the Smokies don't forget footprints. The ridge that raised them. On paper, the Caldwell name didn't mean much, a handful of mailboxes scattered along a county road you could miss if you blinked, a sagging porch or two, a couple of trucks that looked older than the men who drove them, a set of hands that always seemed stained by work. But in the mountains, paper is the least reliable measure of power. Power is the way people pause when you walk into a feed store. Power is the way a deputy says your name with respect, careful not to lean too hard on the consonants. Power is the way your family owns the knowledge that matters, where the water runs clean, which trail leads to a gap, which creek goes dead in August, and how to build something illegal that still feels like a craft. The Caldwells had been making whiskey long enough that the act had stopped feeling like crime and started feeling like tradition. Not the romantic kind, not a banjo-on-the-porch postcard, the practical kind. Bills don't care about pride. Kids need shoes. When a mill closed and jobs dried up, Moonshine wasn't rebellion. It was math. A hidden still in a cut-over ravine could do what paychecks couldn't. Keep the lights on. In 1989, the Caldwell operation wasn't some sprawling cartel. It was tighter than that, smaller, sharper. A copper pot still nested in a rock-walled hollow that caught morning fog and held it like a secret. A worm coil set in cool creek water. A firebox built from stone and steel drum. A mash barrel lineup that always smelled like sweet grain turning mean. It belonged to the clan the way a family Bible belongs to a household. And like a Bible, you didn't take it, not without consequences. The still goes quiet. The first sign something was wrong wasn't a missing still. It was the silence. A Caldwell cousin named Wade, lean, quick-eyed, the kind of man who always looked like he was listening to something other people couldn't hear, came down the deer trail just after dawn. He'd gone to check the firebox, make sure last night's run hadn't burned too hot, make sure the creek hadn't risen and drowned the worm. He expected a scent. Smoke, mash, wet copper. Instead, he smelled nothing. No yeast, no sour, no ash, just cold leaves and rock and the faint sharpness of pine. Wade stopped before he reached the hollow. He crouched, palm hovering over the ground like he could feel the truth coming through the dirt. There was a gap in the ferns where someone had brushed past, too wide to be a deer, too deliberate. His eyes tracked the mud where the creek overflowed a little into the path. Boot prints, multiple, mixed tread. And one thing that made his stomach tighten into a knot. The prints weren't going deeper. They were going out. Fast. Wade moved forward with the care of a man crossing a room where he knows a fight already happened. The hollow was stripped, not dismantled neatly. Stripped! Rocks pushed aside, a charred circle where the firebox had been, cold and wet like a mouth that had been forced shut. Splinters of wood, a rope end cut clean, empty mash barrels lying on their sides like bodies, their insides smelling raw. And the still, copper pot cap Thumper worm, gone. Gone. Like it had never been. Wade stood there long enough for the fog to soak his hair. Then he did something that tells you everything about the kind of world this was. He didn't call the sheriff. He went home. A family meeting, mountain style. Caldwell meetings weren't held at kitchen tables. They were held in driveways, under open sky, where any man who spoke too big could be reminded by the presence of hills that he wasn't the largest thing around. By late morning, trucks were pulling in and shutting off one by one. Old Chevys and Fords with dents that carried histories. Men stepping out with coffee, with cigarettes, with faces that didn't show surprise. Only calculation. The oldest was Everett Caldwell, who had a way of standing still that made other men stop moving. Everett's hair had gone mostly gray, but his shoulders were still thick from decades of lifting what life demanded. His eyes were pale and flat like creek stones. He listened while Wade described the hollow. No shouting, no panic. Just the calm of a man hearing a storm report. When Wade finished, Everett took one slow drag from his cigarette, let the smoke out through his nose, and said, "They didn't do it to drink." That sentence was the first stone in a wall, because Everett was right. If somebody wanted whiskey, they'd steal bottles from a truck stop. If somebody wanted money, they'd hit a store. But stealing a still, taking the equipment itself, meant one of two things. They wanted to become you, or they wanted to erase you. Everett glanced at the men gathered in the gravel, his nephews and cousins and brothers-in-law. Who knew the hollow? That was the question that turned air into ice. Because the still wasn't just hidden, it was hidden well. The hollow was screened by rhododendron, the trail broken by a false fork, the approach watched by the creek itself. You didn't stumble into it. You had to be led. Or you had to be told. A younger man, Caleb Caldwell, shifted his weight and spat into the dust. "Out-of-towners been sniffing around," he said. "Couple fellas in a red truck asked about old logging roads at the gas station last week." "Names?" Everett asked. Caleb shrugged. "Didn't give." Everett nodded like he'd expected that. "Anybody here selling words?" No one answered, but nobody said no either. Because in a family, betrayal isn't always about greed. Sometimes it's about spite. A cousin who felt cheated, a brother who felt disrespected, a man who got told no and decided to make that no hurt. Everett flicked ash onto the gravel. "We find the still," he said. "We find who took it." A pause. Then, softer. "We do it before the law shows up because somebody else starts talking." There it was, the ticking clock. Not a date on a calendar, a pressure. The pressure of rumors. The pressure of fear. The pressure of 13 men who had just made a mistake and were now running with something too big to carry quietly. Everett looked to Wade. "Show me the prints." Wade nodded once, and the Caldwells loaded up. following dirt like it's a map. In town, clues are cameras. In the Smokies, clues are dirt. They drove partway, then parked where the road became more rock than road. From there, they went on foot. The day had warmed, but the hollow stayed cold, shaded by hemlock and steep slopes that caught the sun and refused to let it settle. Everett knelt where Wade had knelt. He stared at the ground like he could read it. Wade stood close, watching. A few other men hovered, uneasy, not because they were scared of the woods, because the woods were honest. It was people that weren't. Everett pointed. 2 different boots, he said. One's got them cheap work soles, one's a hunting boot. And, see that? He traced the edge of a print where the heel had dug deep. Fella carries weight on his right side, Everett murmured. Either hurt, or he's packing heavy. Caleb frowned. How you know that? Everett didn't look up. Because the ground don't lie. He stood, slow, and walked to the creek bank. There, half buried in silt, was a scrap of burlap. Mash sack, the kind used for grain. Torn, and snagged like the mountain itself had reached out and grabbed a piece of the thief. Everett held it up between 2 fingers and sniffed. Sour. Corn. A faint metallic tang. Recent, he said. Wade's throat tightened. How recent? Everett's eyes moved up the slope as if he could see time in the trees. Within a night, he said. Maybe 2. A murmur ran through the men, because within a night meant close. It meant whoever did this hadn't gotten far. It meant this wasn't a story yet. This was still a living thing. Everett handed the burlap back to Wade. They're headed down toward the old timber road, he said. They used a vehicle, heavy. Truck? Caleb asked. Everett shrugged. Or mule cart. But most men ain't patient enough for mules anymore. He looked at the others. Get the dogs. That sentence changed everything, because dogs meant escalation. Dogs meant you weren't just searching, you were tracking. And once a dog got a scent, pride wouldn't let you stop. The dogs that knew the difference. The Caldwells didn't keep bloodhounds for sport. They kept them the way some families kept smoke alarms, a practical tool for a practical life. By mid-afternoon, 2 dogs arrived in the bed of a truck, their voices already bouncing off the trees, deep, baying sounds that made your skin prickle. One was older, a red-brown hound with drooping eyes and scars on his muzzle. His name was Brisco. The other was younger, darker, wilder, named Juniper, because Wade's sister insisted on naming things like they were meant to live in poems. Everett didn't speak to the dogs like babies. He spoke to them like co-workers. He tied Brisco to a long lead, let him smell the torn burlap, then guided his nose to the ground. Brisco sniffed, sneezed, and then his body tightened as if a string had been pulled through him. His head lifted, his ears perked, and he let out one low bay, a note that said, I know. Then he moved, not running, not trotting, moving with purpose. Juniper followed, nose down, tail steady. The men fell in behind, stepping over roots, pushing through brush, their boots soaking in mud and creek water. A half-mile in, they found the first proof that the thieves weren't careful. A cigarette butt. Still damp, crushed into the dirt like it had been stomped in a hurry. Everett crouched and pinched it. He didn't put it in a bag. He just looked at the paper. Not local, a brand the Caldwells didn't buy. Out-of-towners? Caleb whispered. Everett didn't answer. He kept following the dogs. The trail led to the old timber road, An abandoned strip of packed dirt carved into the mountain decades earlier, used when the forest was being eaten by saws and trucks. In places, weeds grew up through it. In others, tire tracks remained visible because nothing else moved there. Brisco pulled hard. Juniper whined. The men stepped onto the road and saw it. Fresh ruts. Deep. Wide. A heavy vehicle had come through recently, and the direction was clear. Down, toward town, toward people, toward trouble. Everett stood in the road, looking at the ruts like they were insult carved into the earth. "We're late," Wade said. Everett's gaze stayed on the tracks. "Not too late," he replied. Then he turned and started walking down the road, and the Caldwells followed. 13 names. One reason. The first name on the list wasn't a thief. It was a talker. A man named Lyle Harp, local, slippery, always around when rumors were thick. Lyle didn't steal equipment, but he knew who would. Everett sent 2 men to Lyle's trailer while the rest of the clan moved to the next step. Information. Because a search without information is just walking, and walking wastes daylight. By evening, the Caldwells were back in a small cinder-block building behind Everett's house. It wasn't a formal place, just a space with a workbench, a radio, and a wall map that still had old pushpins stuck in it from hunting seasons. Everett stood at the bench and laid out what they had. The cigarette butt, the burlap scrap, a small piece of copper found near the logging road, and a new detail, the tire tracks. Wade had measured them, foot to foot, using the length of his boot as a rough yardstick. "Wide stance," Wade said. "Truck's heavy. Could be hauling something." Everett nodded, then took out a legal pad. The list. 13 names weren't pulled from thin air. They were pulled from memory. From grudges. From a ledger of who had crossed the Caldwells and lived. Names of men known for dealing in stolen equipment. Men who ran scrapyards. Men who drank too much and talked too loud. Men who drifted into town at the start of tourist season and vanished before winter. Some were local, some weren't. But all of them had one thing in common. If you needed a stolen, still sold, traded, or hidden, one of these men would know how. Everett wrote slowly, the pencil scraping like a saw. Wade watched the list grow and felt a coldness spread through him. Because naming is a kind of commitment. Once you write a name down, you can't pretend you didn't. "You sure about 13? Caleb asked, uneasy. Everett's eyes didn't lift. "I'm sure the still didn't walk off by itself," he said. Wade swallowed. "What if it's fewer?" Everett finally looked up. His face was calm, but his voice carried weight. "Then 13 men will still learn the same lesson." Nobody laughed. Outside, the first true night of the hunt settled over the ridges, and somewhere out there, a stolen still sat in the dark, copper cooling, mash drying, waiting. Waiting for the hands that stole it. Waiting for the hands that would take it back. The first door they knocked on. Lyle Harp's trailer sat behind a row of dead cars, the kind of place that smelled like old oil and regret. When the Caldwell men arrived, Lyle opened the door like he'd been awake for days. His eyes were bloodshot. His beard was patchy. The light inside his trailer was a harsh yellow that made everything look sick. "Evening," one of the Caldwell men said. Lyle tried to smile. "Everett send y'all?" That was the mistake, because it meant Lyle already knew. He already knew the still was gone. He already knew who the mountain would blame. The Caldwell man didn't step inside. He didn't need to. He just leaned in slightly and said, "You been talking?" Lyle's smile tightened. "Everybody talks," he said. The Caldwell man held up the cigarette butt between two fingers. Lyle's eyes flicked to it. A tiny movement. But enough. "Seen this brand?" the man asked. Lyle licked his lips. "Can't say I have." The Caldwell man's voice stayed even. "Try harder." A long moment. Then Lyle sighed like he was tired of holding his own fear inside. "Red truck," he muttered. "Two fellas. One called the other Mason, I think." "Mason what?" Lyle shook his head, frantic. "Didn't say. Just Mason. They was asking about copper, about old still parts. They said they had a line on something." The Caldwell man's eyes narrowed. "Where'd they stay?" Lyle swallowed. "Motel off the highway. The one with the busted sign." "Names on the room?" Lyle's voice dropped. "Fake. Cash." The Caldwell man leaned back. "Anything else?" Lyle hesitated. Then, softly, "One of 'em had a limp." Wade's memory snapped back. Everett's observation about the heel dig. The ground don't lie, and neither did fear. The Caldwell man nodded once and turned away. As he walked back to the truck, Lyle called out, voice trembling, "I didn't do it! I swear I didn't!" The Caldwell man didn't answer. Because innocence doesn't mean safety when the mountain thinks you helped. The motel with the busted sign. By the time the Caldwells reached the motel, the parking lot was mostly empty. A few cars sat under a flickering light. A soda machine hummed. The air smelled like wet asphalt and cheap detergent. This was the edge of the mountain world, where tourists passed through, where strangers could hide in plain sight. Wade stood near the office window while Everett went inside. Wade watched Everett's posture, straight, unhurried. A man walking into a place that didn't belong to him, like it had always belonged. Inside, the manager, a woman with tired eyes, looked up. Everett leaned on the counter and said something Wade couldn't hear. The woman's eyes widened. She glanced at Wade through the glass. Then she looked back at Everett. She shook her head. Everett didn't move. He just waited. Silence can be pressure. And finally, the woman reached under the counter and pulled out a ledger. Everett glanced at it. Then, after another moment, he slid something across the counter. Cash. Wade's stomach tightened. Not because of the money, because it meant Everett had decided the law wasn't the language of this hunt. Payment was. The woman took the cash like she'd taken it before for worse reasons. Everett walked out. He nodded toward the far end of the motel. Room 12. A curtain twitched. Wade saw it. Just a flutter. But enough. Everett didn't rush. He walked. Caleb and two other men fanned out, casual, like they were just stretching their legs. Wade stayed close behind Everett. The air felt thin. As they approached room 12, Wade heard something inside. A muffled voice, a quick, urgent whisper. Then the sharp click of a metal latch. Everett stopped in front of the door. He didn't knock. He placed his palm flat against the wood, like he could feel the heat of the lie on the other side. Then he spoke, low and calm. "You boys got something that ain't yours?" Silence. Then a voice, young, nervous, answered. "Wrong room." Everett smiled slightly, not friendly, just amused. "Then you won't mind opening up," he said. A beat. Inside, the whispering started again. Wade's pulse thudded, because he knew what that whispering meant. Decision. Desperation. The moment a man chooses whether he's going to talk or run. Everett's voice stayed soft. "Last chance." The door didn't open. Instead, a crash. The sound of a window being shoved up. Caleb shouted, "Back window!" And suddenly the Smoky Mountain blood hunt wasn't a story told in a garage. It was boots pounding on gravel. It was the slap of hands on metal rails. It was a man's breath turning into fog as he ran. Wade sprinted toward the back of the motel, heart punching his ribs, and saw them. Two silhouettes dropping from the window. One moved smooth, the other landed heavy, favoring his right leg. The Limp. They ran toward the tree line, toward darkness, toward the place the Caldwells were strongest. Everett's voice cut through the chaos. "Don't shoot. Don't get stupid." Then, quieter, almost to himself. "Let the mountain do the work." Into the trees. The men vanished into the woods like they'd been swallowed. For a second, everything went still. Then Brisco bayed from the truck, as if he could smell adrenaline. Wade's lungs burned. He looked at Everett. Everett's face didn't change. He just nodded once. "Get the dogs," he said. And as night thickened around the motel, as the busted sign flickered like a warning light, the Caldwells stepped off the edge of town and back into the world that belonged to them. The hunt had found its first living targets, and the list of 13 names suddenly felt less like a threat and more like a promise. Night 1. When the woods close in. The first 100 yards were chaos. Gravel gave way to leaf litter. Flashlights bobbed like fireflies. Branches snapped underfoot and echoed too loudly, as if the forest wanted to advertise every mistake. Wade ran until he tasted metal. Ahead, the two silhouettes were just shadows between trees, moving fast, weaving, trying to become part of the dark. But they'd already chosen the wrong direction. They were running into a world the Caldwells knew the way a man knows his own hands. Everett didn't sprint. He moved at a hard, steady pace, conserving breath, eyes scanning low for broken fern and kicked up dirt. Caleb pushed past Wade and aimed his beam at the ground. "There," he hissed, a scuffed patch. Fresh. Then another. Juniper's nose dropped, and her whole body went tense. Brisco let out a long bay that rolled through the timber like a warning bell. The thieves heard it. Wade saw one shadow flinch, a half-second stumble. Panic doesn't always make you faster. Sometimes it makes you loud, sometimes it makes you sloppy. The trail angled downhill toward a drainage that cut through the woods like a vein. There was water there, thin and fast, over rock slick with moss. If you didn't know the stones, you crossed it slow. If you did know the stones, you crossed it like you'd done it in the dark 100 times. The thieves didn't know. The first one hit the bank too hard, boots skidding. He caught himself on a sapling, snapped it, and kept going. The second, Mason, the one with the limp, came in heavy. His right leg betrayed him on the slick rock. He went down. Not a clean fall. A hard, ugly slide that ended with his shoulder slamming a boulder. A gasp. A curse. Then silence again as he tried to swallow pain and turn it back into speed. Wade reached the drainage just as Mason scrambled up, leaving a smear on the stone. Not much, but enough. A thin line of blood in the beam of a flashlight looks black. And that's when Wade realized what Everett meant. The mountain does the work. You run hard enough in the dark, the woods will take its price. Juniper's nose found the smear. She whined once, high and sharp, then pulled forward. "Stop!" Everett called, voice low but carrying, not a plea, an instruction. The thieves didn't stop, so the Caldwells didn't either. They followed the drainage until it widened and pooled into a shallow, cold basin that reflected the moon like broken glass. On the far side was a rock shelf, a dead end, steep slope to the left. steeper to the right. The thieves reached it and hesitated. That hesitation was a confession. Everett stepped into the open, his light steady on their faces. Two men, younger than Wade expected. One with a smooth, narrow face and a mustache that tried too hard to make him look older. The other, Mason, clutching his shoulder, jaw clenched, eyes wild. They looked like men who'd grown up hearing stories about mountain families and never believed they were true. Everett didn't raise a gun. He didn't have to. He just said, "You can put your hands where I can see 'em, or you can make this night worse." The mustached one glanced at Mason. Mason's breathing was ragged. His right leg was shaking. He knew. He knew he wasn't running anymore, so he lifted his hands. The other followed. Wade watched their palms, empty, no weapon, just sweat. Just fear. Everett walked closer until he was within a few feet. Close enough to smell motel soap and cigarette smoke. Close enough to see that Mason's eyes weren't cruel. They were desperate. Everett's voice stayed calm. "Who sent you?" The mustached one tried to speak and failed. Mason swallowed. We ain't hurt nobody," he said. "That ain't what I asked," Everett replied. Mason glanced down at Juniper, who was straining at the lead like she wanted to bite the truth out of him. Then Mason said the first real thing. "We didn't come up here for fun," he muttered. Everett waited. Finally, Mason exhaled, long and shaky. "Man in town," he said. "Said he'd pay. Said the Caldwells was sitting on money and wouldn't miss equipment." Caleb's laugh was sharp. "Equipment," he repeated, like the word offended him. Everett's eyes didn't move from Mason. "Name." Mason's shoulders sagged. He looked like a man realizing he'd traded one danger for another. "Ray," he said. "Ray Kessler." Wade felt the name hit the air like a stone. Ray Kessler, scrapyard. "Copper?" "The kind of man who smiled while he cheated you." Everett didn't react outwardly, but Wade saw the slight tightening at the corners of Everett's mouth. "Where's the still?" Everett asked. Mason hesitated. The mustached one blurted, "We took it to a barn off the service road. Old tobacco barn. He said keep it there till he got a truck." Everett nodded once. "Keys?" he said. The mustached one fumbled in his pocket and produced a ring. Everett took it, not rough, just certain. Then Everett said something Wade didn't expect. "You boys are going to walk," he told them. Mason's eyes widened. "Walk where?" Everett's voice stayed flat. "Back to the motel, then we're going to talk about how you're going to fix what you broke." Caleb stepped forward, anger leaking out of him like heat. "We oughta—" Everett cut him off with a look. Not loud, just final. Caleb stopped mid-sentence. Because Everett wasn't just leading a search. He was keeping it from becoming something that couldn't be undone. On the walk back, Mason's limp slowed them, but Everett didn't rush him. That was a strange kind of cruelty, letting a man feel every step, letting him replay the choices that put him there. By the time they reached the motel lot, the busted sign was still flickering. The world was still pretending to be normal. But Wade could feel the hunt settling deeper. Tonight, they had two men. Tomorrow, they needed the still. And there were still 11 names on Everett's list. Morning 2. The barn that smelled like metal. Dawn in the mountains doesn't arrive like sunrise in postcards. It creeps. It turns black into charcoal, charcoal into gray, and then finally lets the ridges show their outlines like sleeping animals. Wade sat on the tailgate of Everett's truck and watched Mason and the mustached man shiver in the cold, hands tied in front, not behind, Everett believed in giving people enough dignity to tell the truth, but not enough freedom to lie with their feet. When light finally made the road visible, Everett drove. No convoy, no show, just the men who mattered. Wade, Caleb, Everett. And in the back, the two thieves, silent except for the occasional wince when Mason's shoulder shifted. They left town behind and took a narrow service road that ran parallel to the highway before dipping back into woods. Half a mile in, they found it. An old tobacco barn crouched in a clearing like it was ashamed to be seen. The roof was patched with mismatched tin. The doors hung slightly crooked. And even before Wade stepped out of the truck, he smelled it. Copper. Smoke. Old sour mash like a ghost. Everett held up a hand. Still, he listened. No voices. No movement. Just wind catching the edge of tin. Everett nodded to Wade. Wade walked to the door and pulled it open. The barn's interior was dim, dust floating in the narrow light beams like tiny insects. Then Wade saw it. Pieces. Copper pot on its side. Cap set against a hay bale. Thumper dented. Worm coil half unspooled like a vein ripped out of the earth. The still was there, but it wasn't whole. Someone had already started stripping it, loosening bolts, separating parts, making it easier to haul, easier to sell. Wade's throat tightened. It felt like walking into a room where someone had taken apart something you built with your own hands. Everett stepped in behind him. For a long moment, he didn't move. He just stared. Not with grief. With assessment. Then Everett crouched and lifted a piece of copper with 2 fingers like he was checking a wound. He ran his thumb over a scrape. "Fresh," he said. Caleb's voice went tight. "He been here." Everett nodded, eyes scanning the floor. Then he pointed. A drag mark, fresh in the dust, leading to the back. A smaller door. Everett walked to it and pushed it open. Behind it was a narrow path leading into brush. And there, right at the edge, were tire tracks. Not old. New. A truck had backed up, loaded something, and left. Wade's stomach sank. "They already moved part of it," he whispered. Everett's voice was quiet. "Not all." He turned, looked at Mason. Mason's face had gone pale. "Ray wasn't supposed to come so soon," Mason said, voice cracking. "He said he'd wait." Everett's eyes were flat. "Men like Ray don't wait," he said. Then Everett did something that told Wade the hunt had entered a new phase. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the legal pad. The list. He drew a line through Ray Kessler's name. Not because Ray was finished, because Ray was now the center. Then Everett tapped the next name. A fence. A man who owned a beat-up flatbed and liked cash. "Find him," Everett said to Caleb. Caleb nodded like he'd been waiting for permission. Everett looked at Wade. "You and me take this home," he said. Wade stared at the scattered pieces. Home. The word sounded wrong. Because the still wasn't just equipment, it was a secret. And now too many people had touched it, too many eyes had seen its bones. As they loaded the copper into the truck, Wade felt the weight of every clank, every scrape, every dent. Each sound was a reminder that something had been violated, and somewhere, Ray Kessler was driving away with whatever he'd already taken. The town. Where everybody knows, nobody says. By midday, rumors were already breathing. You could feel it in the way the cashier at the gas station stopped talking when Wade walked in. In the way a man outside the feed store watched the Caldwell truck pass like he was counting the number of men inside. This is how trouble grows in small places. Not by headlines, by glances. Everett understood that. That was why he moved fast. He didn't call friends. He didn't visit the bar to lean on old alliances. He went straight to Ray Kessler's scrapyard. Not to attack. To see. The scrapyard sat near the edge of town. Piles of metal rising like jagged hills, cars stacked like dead animals, a scale house with peeling paint. Wade stood at the edge of it and smelled burnt oil and rust. A place where things went to disappear. Ray Kessler stepped out of the scale house like he'd been expecting them. He was broad, sunburnt, with hands that were always clean in a way that felt wrong for a man who claimed to work with scrap. He smiled. The smile of someone who enjoys having options. "Everett," Ray called. "Been a while?" Everett didn't smile back. Ray's eyes flicked to Wade. "That your cousin?" Wade didn't answer. Ray's smile widened slightly, like silence amused him. "What can I do for you?" Ray asked. Everett's voice was calm. "You can give me what you took." Ray laughed once, too loud. "You been drinking your own product this early?" Everett stepped closer until he was inside Ray's comfortable space. "You know what I mean," Everett said. Ray's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you mean," he replied, and his tone sharpened. "And you best be careful what you're saying in my yard." Everett nodded slowly. Then he did something simple. He reached into the truck bed and lifted a copper segment, the broken piece Wade had found. He held it out. Ray's gaze snagged on it, just for a breath. But Wade saw it, that tiny flicker of recognition, like a man seeing a photograph of a thing he thought he'd hidden. Everett's voice stayed low. "You see it?" he asked. Ray's jaw tightened. "I see copper," he said. Everett nodded. "Then you know it ain't yours." Ray's smile faded fully. Behind him, a worker paused near a pile of fenders, pretending not to listen while listening with his whole body. Ray leaned forward, voice dropping. "You step in here accusing me of theft. You're asking for the wrong kind of attention," he said. Everett's eyes didn't blink. "Attention's already here," he replied. Ray's nostrils flared. "You got proof?" Everett's voice stayed even. "I got 2 men in a truck who say you paid 'em," he said. Ray's face changed. Not surprise. Calculation. 2 men, Ray repeated. "And you trust 2 men?" Everett shrugged slightly. "I trust the dirt," he said. Ray's lips pressed together. Then Ray laughed again, but this time it sounded thin. "Get out," he said. "Get off my property." Everett held Ray's gaze a moment longer. Then Everett nodded once. Not defeated. Just deciding. As they walked back to the truck, Wade felt his skin buzz. Because that wasn't the end. That was Everett confirming what he already knew. Ray Kessler was the kind of man who stole with paperwork and smiles. And now Everett had to decide how far the clan would go to take something back. The 11 remaining names. The next 3 days blurred into a rhythm that felt ancient. Drive. Walk. Listen. Wait. Speak softly. Make the other man speak first. Everett's list of 13 became less like a hit list and more like a net. Each name was a knot. Each knot tightened when you pulled the right strand. They went to a man who sold used tires out of his backyard. He swore he hadn't seen a copper pot in his life. Everett didn't argue. He just pointed at the tire tracks in the man's muddy driveway, the same wide stance Wade had measured. The man's face drained. He admitted he'd loaned Ray a flatbed. For cash. No questions. They went to a mechanic who liked gambling and hated the Caldwells for reasons even he couldn't remember clearly. Everett didn't threaten him. He just mentioned the mechanic's overdue payments to a man everyone in town feared. The mechanic started talking like his words were trying to outrun his panic. They went to a drifter who slept behind the bowling alley. He said he'd seen Ray Kessler meet two out-of-towners by the river. He described the red truck. He described Mason's limp. He described something else. "A third fella," he said, "didn't come close, stood back, wore a ball cap low." Wade felt cold. Ray had another man? The drifter nodded. "Local," he said. "Talked like he grew up here." Everett's eyes narrowed. Local. That word sank into the hunt like a hook, because it meant what Everett feared from the beginning. Someone had led them. Someone had sold the hollow. The Caldwells didn't say it out loud right away. But the question began to follow them. Not as a shout, as a shadow. Who knew the hollow? And who had needed money badly enough to betray family? The copper that didn't add up. On the fourth night, Caleb came back with his hands shaking. Not from fear, from rage. He slammed a folded piece of paper onto Everett's workbench. "A receipt," he said. Wade stared. Ray Kessler ran a scrapyard. Scrapyards logged purchases. Not always honestly, but they wrote numbers down because numbers were a shield. Everett unfolded the paper. It wasn't a formal receipt, just a handwritten note. Weight, price. A signature that looked like it had been scribbled by someone in a hurry. And a date. 2 days before the still vanished. Everett stared at it for a long time. Then he said something quiet. "Ray didn't steal it to sell it," he murmured. Wade looked up. "Then why?" Everett tapped the weight number with his finger. "That's not the weight of scrap," he said. "That's the weight of a still," Wade whispered. Everett nodded. "Ray planned it," he said. "Planned it before the hollow got hit." Wade felt the shape of the story shift. This wasn't a drunken theft. This wasn't two men making a desperate move. This was a man laying groundwork. Buying pieces, arranging a flatbed, renting a motel room. And somewhere in the middle of it, someone local whispering the path through rhododendron. Everett's gaze lifted to Wade. "Bring your cousin," he said. Wade's throat tightened. "Which one?" Everett didn't answer. He didn't have to, because there were only a handful who knew the hollow well enough, and one of them had been acting like a man carrying a secret he couldn't swallow. The one betrayal that hurt most. His name was Travis Caldwell, not a stranger, not an outsider. Family. Travis was Everett's nephew, a man in his late 20s with restless hands and a stare that never held still. He showed up to the cinder block building like he'd been told it was just another meeting. But the second he saw Everett's face, he knew. Travis's shoulders stiffened. His eyes darted to Wade, then to Caleb, then back to Everett. Everett didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He just laid the scrap receipt on the bench. And then, slowly, he set the torn burlap beside it. Then the cigarette butt. Then the copper piece. A quiet altar of evidence. Travis swallowed hard. Everett's voice was softer than Wade expected. "Who did you tell?" Everett asked. Travis blinked fast. "I don't know what you mean," he said, but his words came out too quick. Everett nodded like he'd expected that. "Travis," he said, and the way he said the name sounded like pulling a knife out of a wound. "I ain't asking twice." Travis's mouth opened. No words came. His hands flexed. Then he did the thing guilty men do when the room gets too quiet. He started talking about something else. "I've been having trouble," he blurted. "Bills, my truck's broke down and—" Everett didn't move. Caleb did. Caleb stepped forward, anger crackling off him. "You sold us!" he hissed. Travis flinched as if hit. "I didn't sell y'all," Travis snapped back. "I didn't think they'd take it, I just—" Wade felt a sick heat rise in his chest. "You just what?" Wade demanded. Travis's eyes went wet. Not the clean kind of tears, the angry kind. "I just told Ray where it was," he whispered. Silence slammed down. Even the radio in the corner seemed to stop humming. Wade stared at Travis like he didn't recognize him. Ray Kessler, a scrapyard man, and Travis, blood, had handed him the mountain's secret. Everett's voice stayed low. "Why?" Travis shook his head, frantic. "He said he'd pay me," he said. "He said he just wanted to borrow it. Said he'd bring it back. He said—" Everett cut him off. "Ray doesn't borrow," Everett said. Travis's shoulders sagged. Caleb's fists clenched. "Everett, let me—" Everett lifted one hand, and Caleb stopped. Everett stepped closer to Travis, close enough that Travis had to look up. Everett's voice was almost gentle. "You know what you done?" he asked. Travis swallowed. You put every one of us in danger," Everett said. "You put your mama's roof in danger, you put Wade's name in danger, you put the whole ridge under a light that don't forgive." Travis's face crumpled. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Everett stared at him a long moment. Then Everett reached out, not to strike, to grip Travis's shoulder. It wasn't comforting. It was steadying. "Sorry don't fix it," Everett said. "You're gonna help fix it." Travis's breath hitched. "How?" Everett's eyes were flat. "You're gonna take us to Ray," he said. Travis froze. Because everybody in town knew Ray Kessler wasn't alone. A man like that collected friends the way he collected scrap. Sharp, dirty, useful. But Everett wasn't asking. He was deciding. And Travis, who had opened the door, was going to be the one to close it. The fifth night, the scrapyard after hours. They didn't go loud. They didn't pull up with headlights blazing like a movie. They parked a half-mile away and walked. The air was cold enough to sting. The piles of metal in the scrapyard rose dark against the night sky, their edges catching moonlight like teeth. Wade could hear his own heart. He could hear the soft clink of chain as Travis shifted beside him. Everett didn't bind Travis, but Travis walked like a man wearing invisible cuffs. At the edge of the yard, Everett held up a hand. Still. A light flicked on inside the scale house. A shadow moved past the window. Ray Kessler, awake, waiting. Everett looked at Travis. Travis's face was pale. "He keeps it in the back," he whispered. "He's got a shed behind the stacked cars, locked." Everett nodded. They moved. Quiet. Wade felt every step like he was walking on glass. They passed between two piles of metal that smelled like old rain and rust. Then they saw it. A shed, low, dark, padlock shining faintly. Everett crouched near the door and listened. Nothing. No breathing. No movement. He pulled a small set of tools from his pocket. Simple. Practical. He didn't look like a burglar. He looked like a man who fixed what was broken. The lock gave with a soft snap. The door creaked. Wade's breath caught. Inside, the air smelled like copper and oil. And there, stacked against the wall, were the missing parts. The worm coil, the thumper cap, a bundle of copper piping, pieces that made the still whole. Wade felt a surge of relief so strong it almost knocked him over. Then a voice behind them said, "Well." Calm. Amused. Ray Kessler. Wade spun. Ray stood a few yards away, a pistol low in his hand. Not aimed, but present. Two other men flanked him. One was big. One was skinny. Both looked like they'd grown up learning how to smile without warmth. Ray's eyes moved from Everett to Wade to Travis, and when Ray saw Travis, his smile sharpened. "There he is," Ray said, "my little tour guide." Travis flinched. Everett stepped forward slightly, body angled, not challenging, just controlling space. "Put it away," Everett said. Ray laughed softly. "You in my yard again, Everett," he replied. "And now you broke into my shed. That's trespassing, that's theft." Everett's voice stayed calm. "That copper ain't yours," he said. Ray's eyes narrowed. "Prove it." Everett held Ray's gaze. Then Everett said, "Mason proved it." Ray's smile faltered. "Just a flick. But Wade saw it. Ray didn't know Mason had talked." Ray's eyes snapped to Travis. "You told him?" Ray asked. Travis's voice shook. "I didn't mean—" Ray's tone hardened. "Shut up!" The pistol lifted slightly, not aimed at Everett, aimed at Travis. That's when Wade realized something else. Travis wasn't just guilty. He was expendable. Everett's voice cut in, low and dangerous. "Don't," he said. Ray's gaze shifted back to Everett. "Or what?" Ray asked. Everett took one slow step forward. "I've been alive long enough to know when a man's bluffing," Everett said. Ray's jaw clenched. Then Ray did something that turned the night sharp. He aimed. Not at Travis. At Everett. Wade's whole body went cold. Because this was the moment where stories turn into funerals. Everett didn't flinch. He didn't lunge. He just spoke. Quiet. "You shoot me, Ray," he said, "and you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder in your own town." Ray's lips curled. Then a dog bayed. Not Brisco. Juniper. From the darkness behind the stacked cars, a sound that said, "The woods are watching." Ray's eyes flicked. That flicker cost him, because Caleb moved. Fast. Not toward Ray. Toward the skinny man beside Ray. A shove. A collision. Bodies hitting metal. A curse! Ray's pistol fired. The shot cracked through the yard like lightning. Wade felt the sound in his teeth. The bullet smacked into a stack of fenders, sending sparks. Everett lunged, not wild, but precise, his hand clamping down on Ray's wrist. Ray struggled. Everett twisted. The pistol clattered to the ground. The big man rushed forward. Wade stepped into him, shoulder first, and felt the impact jar his bones. The big man swung. Wade ducked. His own fist drove up and connected with a jaw. A grunt, a stumble. Not a clean fight. Just bodies trying to decide who controls the next second. In the chaos, Travis backed away, eyes huge. He looked like he wanted to vanish. But there was nowhere to go. Ray was on the ground now, Everett's knee pressing into Ray's chest, Everett's hand gripping Ray's collar. Ray's face was twisted with fury. "You think you own this mountain?" Ray spat. Everett leaned in close. "I don't," he said. Then Everett lifted the broken copper segment from his pocket and held it inches from Ray's face. "But I know what belongs where." Ray's breathing was harsh. Everett's voice stayed low. "You stole from my family," he said. "Why?" Ray's eyes flicked, not to Everett, to Wade, to Travis, to the shed. Then Ray's mouth curled. "I was tired of you," Ray hissed. "Tired of the way people look at you like you're some kind of kings up there on the ridge. I wanted to show 'em you bleed like anybody." Everett's eyes didn't change. Ray kept going, rage spilling now that he'd started. "And yeah, I wanted it," he snapped. "The still, the money, the business. Why should you have it and not me?" Everett nodded slowly. "That's what I needed to hear," he said. Ray sneered. "What you gonna do? You gonna kill me?" The question hung there, heavy. Wade felt his stomach tighten. This was the line. The moment the hunt either ended or became the thing outsiders would whisper about for decades. Everett stared at Ray for a long time. Then Everett stood. He stepped back, and he said, "No." Ray blinked. Thrown, Everett's voice stayed calm. "You ain't worth that," he said. Caleb's face was flushed, breathing hard, a smear of blood at the corner of his mouth. "You gonna let him go?" Caleb demanded. Everett looked at Caleb, then at Wade, then back at Ray. "I'm gonna let him live with what he started," Everett said. Ray laughed, ugly. "What's that supposed to mean?" Everett nodded toward the scale house, where the phone line ran. "Means I'm done keeping you safe from the law you like to hide behind," Everett replied. Ray's expression changed. Not fear of the Caldwells. Fear of a different kind of attention. The kind with badges and paperwork, and the power to take your life apart slowly. Everett turned to Wade. "Load the copper," he said. Wade moved into the shed, hands shaking, and started hauling pieces. Each one felt like lifting a piece of dignity off a dirty floor. Behind him, Ray's voice rose. "You can't prove nothing." Everett didn't answer. He simply looked at Travis. Travis's face was streaked with tears now. "Go home," Everett told him. Travis swallowed. "Everett." "Go," Everett repeated. Travis stumbled away into the night, a man who'd broken something sacred and would spend the rest of his life trying to pretend it wasn't true. When the last piece of copper was loaded, Everett walked to Ray one more time. He leaned close, and he spoke so quietly Wade barely heard it. "You wanted to see if we bleed," Everett said. A pause. Then, "We do, but we don't bleed for you." Everett turned away, and the Caldwells left Ray Kessler standing in his own scrapyard with the sound of Juniper's Bay echoing off metal. Aftermath: what the hunt cost. By the end of that week, the still was back, whole again, reassembled. But it didn't feel the same. Wade stood in the hollow and watched Everett fit the worm coil into the creek water. The copper caught sunlight and glowed. A beautiful thing. A dangerous thing. Everett's hands moved with old confidence, but Wade could see something different in him now. A heaviness, not from the chase, from what the chase revealed, that the biggest threat wasn't always outsiders. Sometimes it was the fracture inside your own blood. Caleb wanted revenge, not the legal kind, the personal kind, but Everett kept him on a leash made of responsibility. Because Everett knew the truth, no one likes to say out loud. A hunt can fix one problem and create a worse one. By the time whispers reached the wrong ears, by the time someone in town started telling stories about gunshots at the scrapyard and men running through the Motel woods, the heat was rising, not from Ray, from the attention the hunt had drawn. Everett stood in his driveway one evening and listened to the distance. A car passing too slow. A dog barking in a pattern that didn't feel normal. The mountain holds secrets, but towns leak them. Wade walked up beside Everett. "You think they'll come?" Wade asked. Everett didn't answer right away. Then he said, "They always come eventually." Wade's throat tightened. "Then why keep doing it?" Everett's gaze stayed on the ridgeline. "Because for a long time it's the only thing that worked," he said. A pause. Then, quieter. "But workin' ain't the same as livin'." Wade stared at him. Everett reached into his pocket and pulled out the broken copper segment. He rolled it in his fingers like a worry stone. "I kept this," he said. "Why?" Wade asked. Everett looked at Wade, and for the first time since the still vanished, Everett's eyes softened. "So you remember," Everett said. "Remember what?" Everett's voice was low. "That pride makes you loud," he said, "and loud gets heard." Wade swallowed. Because Wade understood. The hunt had been a victory, but it had also been a warning that the mountain could protect you and trap you, that the code of the ridge could hold you upright and drag you into darkness if you let it. Over the next month, Travis moved away. Nobody said exiled, but nobody invited him back either. Ray Kessler's scrapyard changed hands by the end of the year. Some said he sold, some said he was forced. Some said the wrong people started asking questions, and he couldn't talk his way out. In the mountains, the truth often arrives in pieces, like copper. What mattered to the Caldwells was simpler. The still stayed hidden. The hollow stayed quiet. And the men on Everett's list, those 13 names, learned something. Not that the Caldwells were monsters, but that the Caldwells were patient. That the ridge watched. And that if you stole something sacred, the mountain didn't need sirens to answer. It just needed time, closing the loop. Years later, Wade would still remember the first moment. That broken copper coil segment on the logging road. The way it caught light, the way it smelled like sour mash and smoke. The way it made the silence feel different. He'd remember the motel sign flickering, the thud of boots on gravel, the sound of Juniper's bay slicing through the dark. He'd remember the look on Mason's face when the woods closed in and running stopped being an option. And he'd remember Everett's voice, the calm inside the storm. Let the mountain do the work, because the truth is, the Smokies did. They tripped the thief. They held the scent, they swallowed the footsteps, and they returned what was taken, not through mercy, but through inevitability. In the end, the still didn't just come back. A lesson came back with it. That some secrets don't belong in town. That some pride needs to be carried quietly. And that when night settles in the Smokies, it isn't just darkness, it's memory, it's judgment. It's the mountain holding its breath, waiting to see who thinks they can walk away clean.